Good evening and welcome, dear friends. Today, on behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago, we are so very honored to welcome Dr. Syagnik Banerjee as our guest speaker. Dr. Banerjee is a professor and researcher in the Department of Digital Marketing, Public Policy, and Free Markets at University of Michigan's Flint campus. He has been teaching for more than 15 years, and his papers have been cited more than 1,000 times on Google Scholar in various papers. His teaching covers a wide array of areas. He offered the first course in this country on mobile marketing for Northwestern University in 2013, and also courses on marketing for Ford Motor Corporation engineers. His scholarship relates to the effectiveness and integrity of utilizing geolocation data from GPS units in mobile devices, as well as to the application of Vedic epistemology in the field of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Professor Banerjee has also been recently selected to serve as a board member of the World Association of Vedic Studies. So today his talk will be on two main pillars of Indic religions, Ahimsa and Karma, and we are looking forward to his presentation. And there will be time for question and answers after the talk, so have your questions ready. And on that note, let's welcome Dr. Banerjee to begin his talk.
Am I audible? Okay. So good afternoon and namaste. And thank you for having me over. I must thank Swamiji, the program coordinators, and the organizers for making this event possible. It is a great privilege and honor to be here on this platform to engage with all of you. And going to the slides, a little bit of a challenge in this presentation is I will constantly be going back and forth between the current day and a flashback to the previous world, because our scriptures and values are ancient. The current day, as you know, is very fast-pacing and moving forward. And a lot of the content of the slides are really meant as backup. But I will try to verbally discuss the content in 4 or 5 categories. One of the categories is going to be the topic of theology and governance. Most of us think of faith as a private construct, but there are implications of theology and faith on law and order in society, as well as on practices of corporations, which is private governance. Another topic I will cover is, do changes in the environment demand a change in interpretation of our scriptures? And what are the new patterns of cybercrime that are emerging? What are the existing codes in the scriptures that define injury and crime? And can these codes in the scriptures be applied to these emerging types of cybercrimes? And finally, I discuss a case study of one of the different ways in which crime is emerging and how it can be categorized with existing knowledge of the scriptures. So, to get started, I'll start off with the notion of governance, which we mostly understand by the first part, which is public governance, which is thought of as hard law governance, which is between the state, the non-state institutions, and the citizens. But there is another form, which is private governance, which is a soft law governance, which is based on informal procedures and norms that a group of people opt into. So, for example, the meat industry may be legal, but a group of people may choose for themselves that they will practice a meat-free diet, and as long as you have religious freedom, that becomes a form of private governance the group chooses to implement. Okay, thank you. So, anybody familiar with these images? I had not seen all of them, maybe a few, but the Constitution of India has 22 paintings by Nandolal Bose, and these are 6 of those paintings. And what it shows is that if you go chapter by chapter, like the chapter on fundamental rights has the image of Ram, Sita, and Lakshman. Similarly, on articles of state policy, you have Sri Krishna and Arjun. There is Gautam Buddha, there is Mahavira, there is Samrat Ashok, there is Vikramaditya. And one of the things to remember is all these characters, their embedded stories, carry certain ideals that can be reflected in the Constitution so that the law and order in our society can be inspired by these values. So directly or indirectly, our theology inspires how we govern our society. Now, an example of private governance. There is a think tank based out of the Vatican, which is called the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, and they issued this guideline called mensuram bonum, which means a good measure. This relates to the area of faith-aligned investing. Now, all of us who invest money, we know that we invest towards commercial gains. But communities also invest because they want to build a better world. But how we define a better world varies between religion and religion and between different communities. So this particular document actually looks at faith-aligned investing guidelines and how they should be shaped based on Catholic values. So one of the brief statistics I can cite is that the industry of faith-aligned investing is around $5 trillion. And out of that, $4 trillion is from Islam, 260 billion is from Christianity, and 300 billion is from the dharmic religions, including Vaishnavism, Jainism, etc. So this does not reflect the population of those religions, nor does it reflect how much businesses they control. It only reflects the extent to which their businesses are aligned towards faith and the values. So it could be that there is a much larger population of Christian and Hindu businessmen and investors, but they may be directing their businesses more towards commercial profit and not necessarily towards values guided by their faith. So if you are familiar with the term ESG, this is a term coined by one of the North American companies. These are called environmental and societal governance principles, which basically means that people are always investing money into stocks and portfolios to make more money. But these indicators, they sort of score a company on how sustainable they are in terms of how friendly their environmental practices are, and how inclusive or societally friendly their policies are towards customers, towards employees. And that is reflected in these ESG indicators. So when people invest in stocks, they not only look at what kind of financial returns it's developing, but also the extent to which these corporations whose stocks they're buying are friendly towards the environment and society. Now, this is actually a direct overlap with what different religions prescribe, because every religion has their own way of defining a relationship between human beings and the environment. And that is why, this particular group, the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, they issued these commentaries on ESG principles, saying which of these principles are actually consistent with Catholic values and which ones are not. They issued these commentaries. Similarly, Islamic finance also has had this discussion in the UK. So there are conversations undergoing about the extent to which these government policies overlap consistently or inconsistently with different religions and their values. So this leads to a broader question. Why is theology related to governance? And when I look at a very broad picture, of our scriptures, I identify 3 themes, and this is rather simplistic and broad, but I look at a scientific paradigm which kind of addresses the nature of interconnectedness of matter and energy. Then another theme is self and its purpose, and a third theme is societal norms and order. What's interesting is this whole notion of interconnectedness of matter and energy, which can, by the way, take place in 2 ways. One, it could be through a paradigm of creation. Another one, it could simply be an order of nature. But both ways, these should deliver what is the purpose of the self, and based on that purpose, societal norms and orders are developed. At any point of time, whenever we see that the societal norms and orders are not consistent with this entire flow, or the self does not realize its purpose, we keep going back to the scriptures to reinterpret what they really mean. And there have been some cases in Indian history, like the rise of heterodox sects, dissemination of quantum metaphysics, which is Advaita, Bhakti movement, Indian freedom movement, and these have been highly significant events. And to me, it seems that the last 15 years tell us that a similarly significant event is underway, which is the technological transformation of society and how it is changing everything. Especially the transformation of the nature of injury. So this is, an artwork created by me, and it was inspired by this booklet by Purushottaya Swami on the 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas, which sort of explains, and I call it the story of 3 flowers. It sort of explains that the connection between the creator and his creations has evolved over the ages. At the bottom left, you can see that is Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta, where it is a flower where the petals are closed and the pollen are all contained inside it. This is about the complete oneness. As it moves forward, then you see Ramanujacharya with Vishishta Advaita, which is oneness but with differences. So the petals are still closed, pollen are still inside, but there are differences between body and soul pairs. And the third is where the petals are open. This is the case of Dvaita Vedanta, Madhavacharya in the 16th century, where there is Panchabhed, which means that there is complete separation. Body, spirit, divinity, all are separate. And you start wondering, why did this evolution happen? We start from Advaita with Mayavad, and by the time we reach Dvaita, we have seen complete Tattvavad, which is complete realism, starting from there is no reality to everything is real. And one of the historical contexts is at the time when Shankaracharya is propagating his works, we are in the 700s, sometime in the 700s of the 8th century, and we are considering that to be the golden age of Indian rule, so which is the Gupta Empire. And that's one of the peaks of one of the most glorious times we have had. And so at that time, thinking of an abstract notion of a god, the individual being one, complete one, with the divinity, seems reasonable. But as we look at the 16th century Dvaita Vedanta, by that time invasions have taken place, there has been a lot of destruction and carnage. And it is evident that people have looked at the environment around them and imagined that whether the speculations they have about the connection between divinity and the soul, whether it is the way they had actually imagined, or whether it could be something different. And that is where the separation comes in from. And of course, then there are combinations which go into Achintya Bhedabhed of ISKCON and Nimbarkacharya, and it goes on. But the Advaita to the Dvaita, that phase sort of explains that when there are very strong, striking changes in the environment, we look at our scriptures and we reinterpret them, or we redefine the scope with which they are written. So question is, are the connecting technologies the harbinger of another significant change? And this is where I'm just referring to this paper from Journal of Consumer Research, where the author finds that in a series of 5 studies, people who are riding in an autonomous vehicle, a self-driven car, are more likely to be comfortable or not, or rather less uncomfortable with a pedestrian getting hit by the car because they feel that they are not in charge of driving. The car is doing the driving. So if you really think of the notion of ahimsa and the notion of responsibility, it rests upon us. How can we cope with such an act? One could retort by saying, well, the person is not driving the car, it makes complete sense. But you could also say that without that person being in the car would not have a purpose or a journey or a destination, right? Otherwise, this incident would not take place. So there's definitely something going on because these algorithms are being embedded into the daily products we use, and we are oblivious that they exist. So the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences has actually identified computer-assisted games which dehumanize us in terms of dignity or other factor or cause injury. And they identify specifically computer-assisted games, which is one of the 24 categories they talk about avoiding investing in. So Christianity already recognizes this area needs to enter that theological discourse. So if we look at the digital economy and its transformation, firstly, everybody on the face likes it because it has led to tremendous prosperity. 10% increase in internet connectivity boosts GDP growth by 1.38%. This is an old figure. Today, it must be a lot more. But we also notice that higher penetration of social media has been found to drive more hate crimes. And over the last 15 years, the globe has become less peaceful. Average country scores on the Global Peacefulness Index has declined by 5%, and this has happened between 60 to 80 countries. It's not a small sample. So one question is, do dharmic schools or religions need to publish guidelines or commentaries on non-commission of injury via digital tools? So I will go through a few emerging types or incidents of cybercrimes. One is fake news singularity. This is when you cannot determine whether the fake news is real or fake because you do not have alternate recourse. So all of us in this country, we are spoiled with number of devices we are connected to. In North America, average number of connected devices per capita is 13. Compared to Asia and Africa, that is around 1.5 or 2.5. Which means that if you see some form of fake news on WhatsApp, you can go to CNN or some other device, television, desktop, and radio, and you can find out whether this is fake or real. But if you're in a rural interior, in a village, where mobile is your only option, somebody sends you a video which is fake, but it shows that there are violent crimes going on, being carried out by certain types of strangers. In that village, out of panic, people will start getting hostile and they will form lynch mobs, they will attack strangers. And that has been happening. So if you actually look at the communal incidents of violence, that has been going up with the spread of WhatsApp. Similarly, if you look at social media-triggered genocide, the Rohingya exodus of 700,000 refugees, a major role was played by Facebook, which actually changed its name after that to Meta. And this was not the only fiasco they had. They also had major involvement in the Cambridge Analytica. So they believed that in order to protect their reputation, they needed to change the company's name. So this leads people to ask, can social media companies be held as complicit in incitement to genocide? There are other technology-enabled crimes like chatbots, which are persuading young children or not young children, but young people with mental and emotional vulnerabilities to commit self-harm and suicide in many occasions. There is a whole platform called Mirai Botnet. This is from actually a letter issued by FCC's commissioner, so it's real, it's not fictional, that Mirai botnet, this platform, coordinated 600,000 vulnerable devices to coordinate cyber attacks. And what are these vulnerable devices? They could be your or my phone, electric car, or other device which is connected and which is not secure enough technologically, from which data can be taken or the features can be utilized to take over the device and create some kind of an attack. And this is one of the most spectacular ones, the case of Eichenwald versus Rivello, where a gentleman who was very critical of the then president was identified on social media by the president's followers, and they found out that he was epileptic because he followed the Epilepsy Foundation. So they crafted a GIF image with light strobes which could create or elicit an epileptic seizure. They emailed him this image, and he actually had a seizure. So fortunately, he just about survived. And when this went to court, the judge denied assertions that there was no physical contact. When we think of physical contact, we think of somebody punching you, shooting you, stabbing you. Here, it's just viewing a picture. But the judge said, light comes in rays or waves, comprised in part by photons. Photons hit the retina and are converted into electrical signals. Such electric signals from strobing images can trigger seizures in certain individuals with epilepsy. So this really was a path-breaking precedent because it meant you could show somebody a picture, and if they had a reaction, that could constitute physical contact. And this was not the only one. A whole series of seizure-inducing attacks took place on the Epilepsy Foundation. All the people who followed their account on Twitter were subject to light strobes. So it just seems incredible. I mean, who would think of such a thing? What point could they accomplish? And the thing is, the more and more you allow people to enact covert violence without being visible, the more and more they try it out to see at what scale they can operate such attacks. And another example is that of ransomware attacks on hospitals, where hospitals which are getting resources locked out. This is an interesting example because unlike the GIF strobes, nobody is really attacking the patients. They are attacking the systems that deliver care, and they're delaying care. So most hospital administrators have said 53% of the cases, there is actually a rise in mortality rates because of the cyber attacks. And similarly, all of you are familiar with device addiction. There's a high rise in texting while driving. This is from New York State data. And teenagers have gone to the extent of harming their parents when their devices are confiscated. They obviously lose touch with reality that they are enacting that harm on their own caregivers who probably wish them well. So the future of violence is more indirect and covert, it's more networked, and it's more premeditated. And whatever examples we see of impulsive attacks are on the surface. At a back end, there is some form of instigation taking place, which is pre-planned. So 3 questions. Does injury transcend physical contact? Which actors are responsible because multiple actors are there? How do different schools of thought vary on the above response? So if we break up this whole term, non-commission of injury, we can define injury as an outcome, injury as a process, and commission through karma or agency. I interpret it as agency, and I will defend why I do so. So this is Pujyapada's Sarvartha Siddhi, where they define injury equals severance of vitalities. And each organism they could have at the most 10 paryaptis or vitalities. Taste, speech, smell, sight, hearing, touch, cognitions, emotions, energy, respiration, and life duration, all right? The problem is we know that all organisms don't have all 10. So, I mean, this is something which I find fascinating that, that Jainism has compiled this 8.4 million species classification with between 1-sensed beings to 2-sensed, 3-sensed to 6-sensed beings, starting with plants, going to insects, then those with ants, lice, who have a sense of smell, then sense of sight, scorpions, crickets, spiders, and then animals, and then humans. And it would seem to someone on the face that, okay, the animals which possess more vitalities, if they are injured, it should constitute greater injury than the animals who have fewer vitalities. Interestingly, Jainism is very egalitarian on that note, and they support that all of them should be given their due dignity. In the beginning, I did not understand the rationale about why this was the case until I actually read Buddhism's theory of dependent origination. That I will explain how that explains this egalitarianism. So Jains also have a process, and I am making rather broad strokes because each of these schools of thought have tremendous amount of diversity among themselves. But within Jainism, we have Arambhaja Himsa, we have Samkalpaja Himsa. Arambhaja Himsa is more like incidental harms. Samkalpaja Himsa is like deliberate planned harm. And Buddhism also introduces that likening others to oneself, kill not, nor cause to kill. So they introduce the construct that just being an executor may not guarantee that you are committing injury. You could be an initiator and be liable for that injury. And this is from Dhammapada, chapter 10, verse 129. And similarly, in Vaishnavism, this is chapter 18, verse 25 of Bhagavad Gita. If you see, they identify that not only the most deliberate or passionate actions, but even the ones which are out of ignorance, delusion, where people do not place thought to one's own ability and disregard the consequences, those are also counted as forms of injury. They are not let go. And this, being the most controversial and perhaps the most interesting, is Shaktiism, and this is from Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, which was translated by one of the Swamijis of Vedanta Society, where Janak is telling Sukha that, the so-called act of killing animals in a sacrifice is not an act of himsa. It is ahimsak. And the reason being, the animal is being killed out of a sense of duty. If it was not killed for a sacrifice and it was killed without being a part of the sacrifice, that would be true ahimsa. That would be true himsa. And you start thinking, how does that work? So absence of malice leads to nonviolence. And then you start thinking, okay, maybe there are state actors who are charged with duties, like a person who's carrying out an execution. And he cannot be blamed for the execution himself because he's the hand of the state. So he's purely following a duty and a charge. The problem is when you start applying this, Adolf Eichmann's letter to the president of Israel, where he denied his personal involvement with the Holocaust, said, I cannot be accused because I was not personally involved. I was acting upon order. Then what do you do? And it's a difficult dichotomy. And the person who comes to the rescue on a completely unrelated note is Swami Vivekananda. Because what is being argued here is dispassionate harm is not an act of violence. Swami Vivekananda says that, I'm going to go a little closer. Some say what is implied by being unattached is to become purposeless. If that were its real meaning, then heartless brutes and the walls would be the best exponents of the performance of Nishkam Karma. So that is the key. If you are committing this charge or this duty without a sense of purpose, that is when it's evident as injury, right? So if you are fighting in war and your act is against a soldier, that's one thing, but you're going against a civilian, that's something else. So if you put together all of these and take a look at California law on first degree, second degree, third degree murder, you will see it's organized in exactly the same way: voluntary premeditated, voluntary passionate, non-deliberate. And with the additional layer of Buddhism where there is instigation versus execution. So if you take all of these different principles from the scriptures and you put them in this structure, you realize that you basically have the kind of laws that we follow in society. It makes complete sense. So here, there are two ways in which the implementation of ahimsa can vary. And the first one is based on the theory of dependent origination. If you have not seen this video, I urge you to see it. It's called How Wolves Change the Shape of Rivers. It's a beautiful one. It's basically how Yellowstone Park was transformed when wolves were reintroduced as apex predators. What exactly happened? The deer were eating the foliage, which was destroying the entire ecosystem. Once the wolves started hunting the deer, the oak, willows, shrubs, and berries came back. They attracted birds, insects, beavers, and bears. The regeneration of the forests helped the trees and the shrubs and the roots reduced soil erosion, so they hardened the river banks. When the river banks hardened, the depth of the river increased, aquatic life flourished, right? So the whole system came back to life simply because some initial acts of violence took place. So one of the ways of thinking about ahimsa is this a single act between two entities, or is this a part of a chain of events, and are there some positive events attached to the end of that chain? A second variation is the definition of ahar. This is a verse from Chandogya Upanishad which talks about, ahar suddha, sattva shuddhi. If the food is pure, the mind is pure. If the mind is pure, then the memory is strong and steady. And it is interpreted by Ramanuja in the Vaishnava tradition as biological food, which means that, all of us know that how does the gut affect the mind? Yes, the gut bacteria affect mental and emotional well-being, that's known. But Shankaracharya's understanding of this is that ahar is everything that you take in. It is not just biological food. So, if you ask me, I will say that the kitchen of the mind is in the internet. And that is where a lot of food is being cooked. And that becomes a major part of our ahar. So the question, does violence transcend physical contact? If you think about the Vaishnava traditions of Vishishta Advaita who believe in complete physical reality, maybe the answer is no. But if you think about Advaita, if you think about Jainism, if you think about the chief US district judge in Maryland who gave that court ruling, then the answer would be yes. So this kind of describes the role of definition of injury in the scriptures. We move to the definition of karma. And I believe that there is this one line in Bhagavad Gita which kind of gives a formula, an implicit formula for karma, which is chapter 4, verse 13, which says the 4 varnas were created by me according to the distinctions of guna and karma, which means varna, which is actually the character, is a combination of your qualities and your volition and agency. So the qualities may be inherited, may be a product of your past birth, but your volition is of here and now. Without that volition, without that agency, you cannot be held accountable for the action that you're doing. So what does it really mean? If I drop this bottle of water here, who really did this? Was it done by a creator? Was it done by fate? Was it done by my actions from my previous birth? Or was it done by my volition in this current here and now? And there are different schools of thought who vary on that definition. So first, to understand agency, how much agency I have, they lay out a structure to the self. If any of you have been a student of behavioral sciences or psychology, you will relate to this. So the first one is Advaita Vedanta. They have the definition of the Brahman and the Ahamkara, where the Ahamkara is an extrinsic ego. It's really shallow and on the surface. Samkhya has Purusa and Antahkarana, where Antahkarana is also somewhat, they are somewhere in between the other two. In the case of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is ISKCON, you will see there is Brahman, there is Ahamkara, and there is Aham Artha, which is a deep-seated intrinsic ego that stays awake when we are in deep sleep. They confer a very high state of internal agency to the individual. So this is a list of 15 prominent schools that I pulled up, and this includes all or heterodox schools, orthodox schools, the ones under Vedanta. And this questions what are the exogenous influencers behind our choices. And some of them say the creator, some of them say karmic residues, some of them say fate, and that ends up influencing our choices through different mechanisms. Could be through our nature, could be through our unconscious choices, or something else. So when we take, these cases of crimes that I had shown earlier, we can actually categorize them based on whether they were deliberate, whether the harm was direct or indirect, whether it was single or multi-actor, and these criteria can be used to categorize these harms. So I identified 4 types of cybercrimes. The first is covert virtual instigation of violence. And these are remote actors who covertly do not carry out the act of violence, they simply instigate. And they cannot be detected easily because what they're doing is very probabilistic. It will definitely hit someone, but you don't know who, so it's difficult to legally assign motive to them. And I will give you an example of this later. Second is a category which includes remote assaults on access to vital resources. So they don't attack people, they attack resources. But their malice is completely evident. There is no doubt on what they intend to do. In the first case, intention is questionable. This is the one where cyber attacks can destroy critical infrastructure. Third is people who facilitate and enable injury. Like these could be companies who want to make some profit, and as a result, they could be running certain campaigns or manufacturing devices which lead to violence. So they may not directly intend the harm, but they are beneficiaries from that harm. And the fourth, which is systemic or algorithmic violence, very often, this is similar to what we call Arambhaja Himsa in Jainism, that these are incidental and they are side effects, and they may not be intended. So when, just like that example I said of that self-driven car, if a car is programmed to run into certain types of pedestrians than some others, that may have been done as an act of convenience for those who were designing the car, but it may create biases in the victims. And the company may not have explicitly thought of attacking those profiles of victims, but it may end up happening that way anyway. So here is a case of the category A type of violence, which is the covert instigation of violence. So all of you are familiar with mass shootings, but how do these mass shootings actually take place in today's world? If you look at 1982 to 2020, the number of mass shootings have become far more concentrated after social media's arrival. And this is something which is, in theory, called a contagion effect. If you are familiar with any social literature, you will find suicide contagion is a major effect which is speculated. And it started off as something called the Werther effect, the sorrows of young Werther. People started reading that book and they started imitating the way in which this person in the book, the fictional hero, committed suicide. And so the way this works is people who are emotionally and mentally vulnerable, they often see a glamorization of self-harm all over media, and they go out and imitate this act. And because of their vulnerabilities, they're not able to self-regulate to prevent themselves from doing it. So the way this happens today, there is a mass shooting incident. Social media users comments pour in. As the topic escalates in search rankings, news coverage, social media algorithms, and platforms, the more the volumes increase, the more the visibility increases. People start sharing comments about the evils of firearm possession. The moment that happens, gun owners start buying more guns in fear of losing right to bear arms. First thing. Second, gun companies make more money. Their stocks go through the roof, actually, profitability-wise. So they start floating out new deals for first-time buyers. People who do not possess guns, many of them look at this incident and they start wondering, okay, so the police are not capable of protecting these victims. Maybe I need to own a firearm. And so it goes through a whole cycle. And finally, a person who has mental health conditions, who were previously contemplating some act of self-harm, may see this as an opportunity or a way out to take out their grudge against certain groups who they have had differences with. And this cannot be taken to a court of law. If it could be, then we would not need to have a discussion in a forum like this. It is very fuzzy and it is very probabilistic, and which is why people refuse to acknowledge that such a pattern could exist. So this raises the question on Section 230 versus Purva Mimamsa Sutras. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act says no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider, which means unless you manufacture the information, if you're simply the messenger and passing it on, you cannot be held liable for the outcome. Now, in the past, newspapers used to carry journalistic responsibility, journalistic ethics. Today, platforms, digital platforms, do not have that responsibility because of this particular law. Now, they believe that it's only the executor, because remember, what they are doing is their algorithms are actually showing this news to us. That is triggering a whole chain of reactions. But because of this protection, they cannot be held liable. In our Purva Mimamsa Sutras, the initiator, just as in Buddhism, as Gautam Buddha's works suggest, the initiator does carry responsibility. So both Purva Mimamsa Sutras as well as Buddhist sutras would counter-argue that Section 230 is not ethical. And so this is my visualization of the Section 230 of the CDA. This is a visualization of Jayadratha Vad. And the real relevance is that Sri Krishna uses his chakra to block out the sun. Once the sun is blocked out, Jayadratha thinks day is night, and he emerges only to get killed. So this is a similar case for companies that are using their algorithms. They can pretty much block out the sky and make us believe anything they want us to believe. So there are some other cases. Am I towards the end? Have I crossed my required time? So there are some other cases where social media is being used to target communities. And one of the centers I encourage you to look at is a Rutgers University report sponsored by Network Contagion Research Institute. So they have been looking how these acts of targeting communities are taking place. So we know that there were, in 2022, Leicester and Birmingham experienced a lot of violence. But that does not break up. That does not break out overnight. It may seem like it happened out of an impulse, but they looked at tweets which have been going back a long time, and there was enough propaganda which was being floated into online channels and platforms which triggered people to move in a certain direction. So finally, when a trigger came, these people acted on that trigger. So they were actually being trained for a long time. So if you look at this report, you will see that they examined more than 1 million tweets and revealed that Iranian trolls were propagating anti-Hindu stereotypes to amplify division as a part of a covert social media campaign accusing Hindus of perpetrating a genocide against minorities in India. And this is a fairly rigorous academic think tank, so you can take a look at some of their reports. So, there are various action options among us, including crisis detection, coordination, and advocacy. And some of the things to take away from all this is that, number one, yes, ahar is all we take in. So everything that happens on the internet is somewhat related to our consumption, and our principles from these scriptures can actually be applied to define that form of injury. It can be used to define who carries the liability for those actions. which is why I personally believe that religious institutions or different schools, just like the faith-based think tank in Vatican, they should have some responsibility to offer commentaries or guidelines for households based on their understanding of the scriptures to define the do's and the don'ts. Okay. So I'm going to stop there. I may have gone a little too fast, so feel free to ask questions. Thank you. Thanks.
If you have any questions?
Sure.
No, wait for the...
Yes, yes, of course. I mean, there, I mean, what is the question there?
No.
Can you repeat?
It is some kind of a utilitarianism law.
I'm sorry, I'm not being able to hear you correctly. I
No,
think
what I'm saying, suppose if majority thinks that if they subjugate minority for their greater benefits, would that be considered as a violence?
Well, depends on how you define subjugation, and this is where physical contact comes in. And also, remember, any act of physical violence, it doesn't happen overnight, especially if it is as planned as you're talking about. Then it means that people are seeding in conversations and communication into an online platform, and they're building the tempo for it. So today, I mean, partly digital environment harms us, but you can also track exactly what is going on. And that becomes a part of a court case. So if you look at the report I was mentioning about, they have documented everything about, these people, when they have these conversations, they are not explicitly saying we are going to go out and hurt A or B. They will create cartoon images, they will use code names, and they will speak in a derogatory fashion about these groups. And the whole conversation will follow codes. And you can observe this over a period of time and realize what's going on.
No, I'm saying if you can look at the incident over a little bit above the two communities and see that if it is actually benefiting the greater people, I mean greater percent of people,
Yeah.
Why we should be considering that as a violence?
No, I mean, I think injury, the law about injury and the ethics of injury are true for everyone, right? Because just like Jainism shows, it doesn't matter how many vitalities you possess, right? Ultimately, the whole ecology survives on all these organisms. So harm is harm. So I know that a lot of my Vaishnava friends, they consider harm to animals as more important, but they may not be as particular about plants, right? But Jainism is very particular about plants, insects, everything. So let me use that example, right? Even if a community or a group or an organism is insignificant, they are a part of the ecology. So they have the right to be a defense.
Thank you.
Okay. My question, I don't know if it will sound right or something, but a soldier killing the enemy soldier with the purpose of defending his country is not ahimsa.
So that's based on that particular interpretation from Shakti Purana, and I'm trying to make sense of why they would have that protocol. So, yeah, I am not encouraging countries to go against war with each other, but
Then my question, if that is a way of looking at it, then sacrificing a goat for a ritual, like, are this the same thing, like defending
no,
your
it is not
country?
the same thing. It is not the same thing. That is what Swami Vivekananda said, that it has to have some purpose. So in the case of two nations at war, that is a different context. But if it is a person or an animal who do not play that role in that context, who are not offending you or they are not endangering you, then carrying out that act does not satisfy that clause of absence of malice. So, that is why I think this particular clause has been misused in various cases. I have grown up in West Bengal, in Kali Puja, we have the concept of vegetarian meat, and I can see that there are ways in which it can also be misused. So there are various, the practice is different from the theory.
And one more thing, as much as we need guidelines for the society from all perspectives, do you not think common sense solves a lot of the problems in
Only
society?
if the sense is common, right? Do you see anything common these days? Because social media rests on the fact that people should be, all messages are to be personalized. So out of 4 members in a family, they don't even seem to see the same TV channel, right? So how can you have any common ground there? Yes.
Well, you're talking about physical violence, but couldn't somebody who is a very, very strict vegetarian nonetheless be exploitative, take advantage of people economically?
Yes.
So where does that kind of violence come in?
Thank you. So that is where I talk about direct versus indirect harm, right? Because if you really think about it, if a person is deprived of income, ultimately that person's health is going to suffer, right? So that also falls into violence. So there are different degrees or grades of violence. The direct violence is the one where you directly commit the assault. Indirect violence is economic and other manners.
But perhaps people would use their strict, their non-injury towards all these forms of life as kind of justification for being economically violent. They would say, well, I'm doing this, I'm not killing ants, but I'm charging this guy 100% interest. So it kind of interferes, I think.
Yeah. There is some interesting literature on topic of virtue signaling, right? Where you signal your virtues at one end and you try to compensate at another end, right? And it's a very human instinct. So.
Actually, you are saying that sacrificing an animal in a ritual, is that violence or not violence? I didn't understand.
Based on Swami Vivekananda's definition, that should be an act of violence.
Yeah, that should be an act of violence. Yeah,
act of violence. Okay. Unless you are engaging in the act to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, I have a completely different question, slightly tangential. I know you raised Bhagavad Gita, and Krishna says, Chaturvarnyam maya srishtam guna karma vibhagayoh. Now, a lot of times, even I used it to say that there is caste system was not based on birth. Okay.
Say that again. Caste system was?
Is not based on birth. Yeah, it's not hereditary, what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I don't know if you noticed it, that particular slide where I mentioned this, that reference in that slide was a course I had taken in Hindu University of America by a person called Kalyan Vishwanathan. He had written this paper about the differences between Varna, Jati, and caste.
Yeah.
So this is one of the key references he mentioned defending that Varna is different from caste.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if you look at the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, clearly there Arjuna says, when women are corrupted, then Varna Sankarma happens. Varna there meaning is same as here. So there he's saying, obviously he's meaning that this is by birth, and I do not, obviously
so
Krishna.
I think he refers to families there, because even later, if you go down to chapter 9, you will see Sri Krishna talking about who has access to worshipping him. And he talks about people of all backgrounds, including women and people of different families, right? So there is a sense of inclusion mentioned in there. One of the things is, it is very difficult sometimes to understand that they are referring to character and not inheritance or family, especially if we have grown up in an environment understanding that as family and caste. And it has taken me a lot of time to see those intricate differences. So I think one has to realize that can those same sentences be interpreted if you use the concept of character instead of the concept of family or inheritance? And see if the sentence still makes sense. If the sentence still makes sense, that may be the original intent.
Yeah, I'm not questioning about the wisdom in Bhagavad Gita. I mean, I'm sure universality is there in a lot of other chapters, okay, in Bhagavad Gita. But that, just the interpretation of caste, whether by birth or not by birth, you can see there are different, you can say there may be contradictions.
When you mentioned it, I knew exactly what you were talking about, because that is one of the conflicting notions that comes up when you start going on this thread of reasoning.
Yeah, I see. Okay, thank you.
Hi. So you had a slide with 3 different columns, and 2 of them started with Brahman. I don't remember. I haven't seen the other words or
3
names.
models of self, right?
The 3
Brahman,
models of self.
Antakarana, and then the Ahamkara and the Ahamartha.
Okay. Could you explain or briefly touch on the role of those 3 models of self?
So, there are many different... So, okay, let me go back to a completely layman's explanation. The way I understood it, because I have been a student of behavioral sciences. So when we read Sigmund Freud, we talk about the unconscious self and the self. Once you move on to Carl Gustav Jung, then you have the collective unconscious. And then you start thinking, who comprises the collective? Is it the people of this village? Is it people of the nation or the world? Or do the animals and insects, are there also included? And then Jung's philosophy actually is the connection between psychology and theology. So once you start thinking about these different models, you can see that though it is theology, it is a form of an extension of psychology. Psychology itself has a lot of speculation. And we are simply extending the speculation beyond the individual, right? So, each of those darshans are supposed to take, I believe, 11 years to master. So I have really studied them on the surface, but they are in incredible depth. And you can take a look at Sarva Darshan Samgraha, that is by a Madhavacharya. And they have explanation of, but the ones that I presented out here, they are Gaudiya Vaishnavism and the Advaita are under Vedanta. Samkhya is separate. But if you want to know a little bit about the darshans, I think Sarva Darshan Sangraha is a good reference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll call you. I'll listen. Thank you, Professor Banerjee, for a very engaging and educational talk. We appreciate it. I'm sure from the Q&A we can say how much we appreciate it. And it was very thought-provoking because I feel you have opened up new channels of thought for us, and that's, I think, a key purpose of this series of talks, in this Know and Love series. We appreciated how you combined and compared the various schools within Hinduism and also the Indic religions like the Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, and the topic of ahimsa and action, karma. You brought it in the light of very contemporary. I mean, looking these understanding in a contemporary light, in a very technology-driven society, and I think ethics is such a big topic now, right? In artificial intelligence and also in the tech context. So I think bringing the light of the Indic wisdom here is very much appreciated, and I'm sure you opened up our thinking in those lines, and we can follow up during our fellowship hour now. And with that, I request our longtime devotee Arvind Sisla to come and on behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago to offer you a token of appreciation.
Thank you.
Thank you again, and please come and join for some refreshment.